Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This editorial evaluates the ongoing tensions between US and Iran over Iran's nuclear weapons program. This editorial examines the path available for diplomacy and peace between the two countries, considering that a new administration is all set to take power in the United States under President-elect Joe Biden in January 2021. See, the last time that President-elect Joe Biden was a part of the American administration was when he was serving as the vice president to former President Barack Obama. During his tenure as the vice president, he had played a direct role in the signing of the landmark Iran nuclear deal, or also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was signed in 2015. This historic deal had brought tensions between US and Iran to an end, and it had provided a path through which Iran could be peacefully prevented from procuring nuclear weapons. This deal was signed between the P5+1 countries and the European Union and Iran. The P5 includes the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and +1 refers to Germany, and along with the European Union, these parties had negotiated the JCPOA with Iran. As per the deal, Iran had agreed to scale down its nuclear weapons program by cutting down on nuclear enrichment, and in return, the United States had agreed to lift the crippling economic sanctions that had been imposed on Iran. So this had provided a way forward to peacefully resolve the tensions between US and Iran, and it was seen to have the potential to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. But then came the Trump administration in 2017, which disrupted the ongoing peace process by unilaterally withdrawing the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The Trump administration made baseless allegations that Iran was violating the terms of the deal, and it accused Iran of continuing nuclear enrichment, even though Iran had agreed to open up its nuclear reactors to inspections by the IAEA. So by citing these violations as an excuse, the Trump administration withdrew the United States unilaterally from the nuclear deal, and over the last 2 years, the Trump administration had reimposed economic sanctions against the Iranian government. Then the Trump administration had also tied up with its Western allies, such as Israel and Saudi Arabia, which share a regional rivalry with Iran, to target Iran through various tactics in order to exert maximum pressure on the Iranian government so that Iran could be forced to renegotiate the deal by entering the negotiating table, which would suit the interests of the Trump administration. So the United States under Donald Trump aligned with Israel and Saudi Arabia to isolate and sideline Iran, and in order to exert maximum pressure on Iran, the Trump administration quit the nuclear deal and reimposed economic sanctions in order to cripple its economy. These sanctions that were imposed by the Trump administration were primarily targeted at the oil and financial sectors of Iran, and this was one of the pressure tactics adopted by the United States under Trump in order to punish Iran for its proxy war against Israel and Saudi Arabia. The US further stepped up these tensions by choosing to assassinate a senior Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, and as a result, tensions between US and Iran have remained at an all-time high over the last 2 to 3 years. This maximum pressure tactic of the United States, with support from Israel and Saudi Arabia, has been met with maximum resistance from Iran. As Iran started feeling the impact of the economic sanctions, it started targeting American drones in the region, and it even escalated its proxy war against the US and its allies by targeting oil tankers in the strategic Strait of Hormuz by using proxy elements, and also by targeting the oil refining plants of Saudi Arabia by using proxy outfits such as the Houthi rebels of Yemen. So this tit-for-tat action by the United States under Trump and Iran's escalation of the proxy war, with continued support of Israel and Saudi Arabia to America's maximum pressure tactics, had significantly escalated the tensions between US and Iran. So now, the new Biden administration would be looking to bring back the US-Iran relationship back to the path of peace and diplomacy by moving away from the hostile approach that was seen in the last 2 to 3 years. During his presidential campaign, Joe Biden had made it very clear that under the new administration, the US would definitely return back to the Iran nuclear deal, which indicates that the United States would be willing to rejoin the JCPOA. But of course, the Biden administration will also push for several amendments to the deal in order to deter Iran from procuring nuclear weapons and also to push Iran away from its path of proxy war against regional rivals such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. But however, it appears that attempts are being made in the region to disrupt this upcoming peace process. Just a few days ago, a top Iranian nuclear scientist was assassinated, and the Iranian regime has blamed this assassination on Israel's covert operations in the region. Iran believes that Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad, is behind this assassination, and it has already promised to retaliate against these covert attacks against Iran's nuclear program. Any such retaliation from Iran would definitely escalate tensions between Iran and Israel, and maybe even between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And such escalation in regional tensions is not conducive for the new Biden administration in the United States to pursue a path of peace and diplomacy with Iran. So in this context, the editorial is urging the President-elect Joe Biden to go back to the nuclear deal without expecting further concessions from Iran. But however, the editorial also highlights the importance of preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons because that would destabilize the region. And the editorial also calls upon Iran to scale down its proxy war against other countries in the region. But still, there are several hurdles that the two governments have to overcome before they can initiate any such peace process. And these hurdles become quite evident if you look at this article from page number 13. According to this article, the Iranian parliament, which is dominated by the hardline elements, has introduced a new law which seeks to raise tensions with the US and the Western countries. As per the new law, the Iranian government is obliged to prevent IAEA inspections of its nuclear facilities, and the Iranian parliament has mandated its government to step up nuclear enrichment back to 20% by installing new nuclear centrifuges. These provisions of the new law directly go against the provisions of the JCPOA or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and it will firmly put Iran on the path of procuring nuclear weapons. So this is basically a retaliation of the hardline elements in Iran following the repeated provocation by the Trump administration and Israel and as well as by Saudi Arabia. Under the new law, the European parties to the nuclear deal have been given 1 month notice to ease and remove the sanctions on Iran, or else the Iranian government would be mandated by the law to prevent IAEA inspectors from reviewing the nuclear facilities of Iran. And it also mandates the government to step up nuclear enrichment back to 20% levels by installing new nuclear centrifuge facilities. So these new developments are making it much harder for the two leaders to pursue the path of peace and diplomacy. In the United States, President-elect Joe Biden has already shown interest in reviving the talks and in bringing US back to the nuclear deal, but his approach is being blocked by the conservative elements within the United States, that includes its defense and strategic community, and as well as by US allies such as Israel and Saudi Arabia, which are looking to target and isolate Iran. Then within Iran as well, the moderate approach of Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is being blocked by the radical and hardline factions within Iran's parliament and within the Iranian government and the defense forces. So in this context, the editorial is calling upon the Iranian government and as well as the President-elect Joe Biden to make the right start towards peace and diplomacy. Next, on page number 6, we have a column that deals with the ongoing farmers' protests. Over the last few days, thousands of farmers, primarily from Punjab and Haryana, they have laid siege to the national capital and they have been camping at the Haryana-Delhi border, and they have been demanding that the centre should roll back the new farm laws that it has introduced. This is a topic that we have covered in detail over the last few months, and we have discussed that the farmers and farmer organizations in the country, they are particularly worried about the possible withdrawal of MSP or minimum support prices, and they are concerned that the public procurement system might be dismantled under the new farm laws. These laws allow the farmers to sell outside the APMC yards, and they are allowed to sell directly in the market. The fear of the farmers is that these laws do not guarantee MSP, they do not recognize MSP as a legal right, and it might possibly lead to the dismantling of the public procurement system. Farmers are worried that if they are exposed to the open market directly, then it might lead to their exploitation by the large private players. While the farmers have been protesting on these grounds and they have been demanding the centre to roll back the new laws, the government has reassured them and it has tried explaining to the protesters that the new laws actually provides more options to the farmers, which might lead to an increase in their agricultural income. The government has also promised that there won't be a withdrawal of minimum support prices and the public procurement system will be continued. But despite these assurances from the government, protests have continued around the country and it has intensified particularly in Punjab and Haryana. This is because the two states are heavily dependent on MSP and public procurement, and according to available data, nearly 88% of the paddy crops and 70% of the wheat crop cultivated in these two states, they are covered under the MSP system and they are publicly procured by the government agencies. So this assured public procurement with the assured minimum support price has guaranteed the well-being of the farmers in these two states, and hence they are naturally concerned that the provisions of the new farm laws might lead to the withdrawal of MSP from the government and it might lead to the dismantling of the public procurement system. While these concerns of the farmers are absolutely genuine, the writer does point out that the entry of private players is very crucial for the agriculture sector because large private investments are desperately needed to strengthen the storage and warehousing facilities and the logistics infrastructure in the country, especially cold chain logistics infrastructure. The entry of private players will also bring in better quality inputs and it might lead to better price realization for the farmers as well. So as promised by the government, this might actually result in an increase in farmers' income as their options would have increased in the open market. But however, one cannot ignore their concern because private players with a larger bargaining power might exploit the weaker bargaining position of the small and the marginal farmers. This might lead to a private monopoly and adversely affect the income and the well-being of the farmers. However, the writer points out that the MSP in the public procurement system is not just indispensable for the farmers, especially in these two states. This system is also indispensable for the government as well. Because MSP in the public procurement system is crucial to sustaining the public distribution system. As per the National Food Security Act, the government is obligated to uphold the legal right to food, and it has been legally mandated to provide for a rights-based entitlement through the PDS system. Under the PDS, there are around 80 crore beneficiaries in the country, which includes people from BPL families and as well as migrant workers who have been particularly affected by the pandemic and the lockdown. Now that the government has increased the allocation of food grains to these vulnerable sections, its dependency on the PDS and on the MSP in the public procurement system has increased further. So there is no question of the government withdrawing MSP or dismantling the public procurement system. Because if the government chooses to do that, then it will have to procure the food grains for the PDS to the open market, which would not only increase the cost of procurement for the government, but also lead to severe shortage in the open market, thereby leading to a price rise in essential food items. And now that the government has amended the Essential Commodities Act as well, it allows the sellers in the open market to possibly resort to large-scale holding, which would further increase the prices of essential food grains. So that is a step the government cannot afford, and hence it's highly unlikely that the government would look at open markets for procuring food grains and crops and cereals for the PDS. This explains the government's heavy dependency on the MSP and the public procurement system. So it's not just the farmers of Punjab and Haryana who are heavily dependent on it, but even the government is heavily dependent on the system. So in this context, the writer says that the government has a responsibility to reassure the farmers and address their primary concerns and provide for more clarity with regard to the benefits of the new farm laws. Here the writer suggests an improvement to the new farm laws which can reassure the farmers. He says that the government will have to reach out to the farmers and assure them that a transparent regulatory mechanism would be provided in order to regulate the activities of the private players in the open market. This can not only bring in greater transparency with regard to procurement of crops, but it also reassures the farmers and allows the private players to be held accountable in case of any violations. And hence, the need of the hour is to establish a transparent regulatory mechanism which could help in resolving the dispute between the farmers and the government. Now let's take up another column from page number 6, which deals with the controversial topic of religious conversion. This column has been published in the backdrop of several laws and ordinances that have been proposed by several state governments against the so-called phenomena of love jihad. See, love jihad is a term that has been coined by right-wing Hindutva outfits, and they allege that there is a conspiracy by Islamic radicals to entice a Hindu woman into marrying a Muslim man and thereby force her to convert her religion, and it has been labelled as a jihadist plot against Hinduism. So recently the UP government brought in an ordinance that declares religious conversion which is forcefully obtained as an offence, and it also declares any interfaith marriage that has been found to be made solely for the purpose of religious conversion as null and void. Now other states such as Karnataka and even Madhya Pradesh have promised to come out with similar laws to deal with the forceful religious conversion that has been carried out in the name of interfaith marriage. This ordinance in the first place, which was brought out by the UP government, was triggered by a recent ruling of the Allahabad High Court. Last month, the Allahabad High Court had delivered a landmark verdict in the Salamat Ansari case, under which a Muslim husband and a Hindu wife had sought to protect their marriage from a FIR that had been filed against them that alleged criminal abduction of the women and forceful religious conversion. In this case, the Allahabad High Court declared that religious conversion, even if done solely for the purpose of marriage, is not just legal and constitutional, but it is also a guaranteed fundamental right, as the choice of one's religion and the choice of one's partner falls under one's personal liberty, which is a guaranteed fundamental right under Article 21. While passing this ruling, the Allahabad High Court relied upon right to privacy, which was declared as a fundamental right by the Supreme Court in the landmark Puttaswamy case. The Allahabad High Court interpreted that the right to choose one's partner and the right to choose one's faith falls under right to privacy, and the state should not be allowed to interfere with these personal decisions. But the government relied upon the Noor Jahan case, in which the judiciary had ruled that a religious conversion carried out solely for the purposes of a marriage is valid and legal only if there is honest conviction in the individual with regard to the new tenets and the principles of the new religion that the individual is adopting. But the Allahabad High Court overruled the government's argument, which was based on the findings of the Noor Jahan case, and it stated that this was an erroneous judgment. Because according to the High Court, Article 25 of the Indian Constitution guarantees freedom of conscience, which allows an individual to freely profess, practice and propagate any religion. It guarantees each individual his or her own sense of moral right and wrong and allows them to make their own personal choices when it comes to intimate matters such as one's faith or religion. According to the writer, even other personal intimate matters such as marriage, choosing one's partner, sexual orientation, etc., they all fall under the same ambit, and the Constitution of India guarantees the freedom of conscience, which allows the individual to make their own personal choices without any interference from the state. However, the new anti-religious conversion laws that have been proposed by the states is likely to be based on a Supreme Court's ruling of 1977, in which the Supreme Court had upheld a couple of anti-conversion laws that were passed by the state governments of Madhya Pradesh and Odisha. Under these laws, before any interfaith marriage in a district, it was made mandatory to obtain the approval of the district magistrate, thus allowing the state to play a direct role in personal matters such as marriage and religion. So in this context, the observations of the Allahabad High Court in the Salamat Ansari case is very important, because the High Court had said that it looks at the husband and the wife as just two individuals and not as a Muslim man and a Hindu wife, and as consenting adults they have the freedom of conscience and the personal liberty to choose their partners and their faith. The writer argues that it is these cherished values of the Indian Constitution that has allowed the Indian society to endure for all these years. Now let's take up an article from page number 9. China has proposed to build a new dam and a hydropower project on the lower reaches of the Brahmaputra river. See, the Brahmaputra is a transboundary river between China, India and Bangladesh. The Brahmaputra and its tributaries is considered as the lifeline of Tibet, India and as well as Bangladesh, and it is known as Yarlung Tsangpo or the Yarlung Tsangpo while flowing in Tibet. After originating near Mount Kailash, the river flows in an eastward direction and it almost takes a 180-degree turn at the Great Bend to continue flowing into India. After draining the northeast of India, the river enters Bangladesh and finally drains into the Bay of Bengal. On this river, China has already constructed 4 dams and hydropower projects, and all the 4 projects are run-of-the-river projects which does not result in any diversion of the river. The first project to be operationalized was the Zangmu hydropower project in 2015, and it is located in the upper and middle reaches of the Brahmaputra. 3 more dams and hydropower projects are also coming up in the upper and middle reaches of the Brahmaputra, known as Dagu, Jiexu and Jiacha. Now China has proposed a new hydropower project after the Great Bend closer to the Indian border, and this would be the first hydropower project of China in the lower reaches of the Brahmaputra. But China has assured India that this shall also be a run-of-the-river project which does not result in any diversion of the river. While assuring India, China has justified that it has a legitimate right to build such projects, but it has stated that while constructing these projects, it has always taken into account the concerns of the downstream countries, that is India and Bangladesh. China has highlighted its cooperation with India and Bangladesh with regard to flood reporting and flood control, and even with regard to disaster management and emergency relief. For India, the concern is that there is no water sharing treaty between the two countries. But however, in 2006, an expert level mechanism was constituted to provide for cooperation between India and China with regard to all aspects concerning the Brahmaputra river. Apart from this expert level mechanism, there are diplomatic channels available as well to help resolve any disputes and concerns with regard to the sharing of the Brahmaputra waters. So in the light of this new proposal that has been made by China, India has stated that it will make use of the expert level mechanism and the diplomatic channels to raise its concerns, and it shall closely monitor the developments on the Chinese side. Now let's take up an article from page number 10. India has called upon the United Nations to expand its criticism of religious hatred and violence. This statement was made by India during the Culture of Peace, which is an annual UN session that is organized every year since 1997. India's argument is that the Culture of Peace session of the UN and other UN resolutions have always focused on just the 3 Abrahamic religions and the hatred and violence faced by these 3 Abrahamic religions. Abrahamic religions are nothing but a reference to Judaism, Christianity and Islam. These are the 3 religions that share a similar origin, and they took birth in Jerusalem, and they are often referred to as the Abrahamic religions. India has argued that the United Nations in general and several UN resolutions, and as well as the Culture of Peace session, has always focused on hatred and violence against only these 3 Abrahamic religions, while the non-Abrahamic religions have been ignored. The Indian representative has pointed out that non-Abrahamic religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism and even Sikhism has faced a lot of violence and hatred as well, and hence India has called upon the UN to expand its criticism of religious hatred and religious violence. India has stated the example of how the Bamiyan Buddha statues were destroyed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. It has highlighted how religious minorities such as Hindus, Buddhists and Sikhs have been targeted by radicals in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Recently, for example, a Sikh Gurudwara in Kabul was bombed by the Islamic State, and radical jihadist outfits in Pakistan and Afghanistan have repeatedly called for the ethnic cleansing of Hindus, Sikhs and Buddhists. So in this context, India has called upon the United Nations to end its discriminatory approach towards the non-Abrahamic religions by expanding its criticism of all forms of religious hatred and violence. But however, it needs to be noted that this argument of the Indian representative is not factually correct, because in 2001, the United Nations did pass a resolution condemning the Taliban for destroying the Bamiyan Buddha statues and other cultural artifacts in Afghanistan. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Which of the following statements are correct? Fluorosis is caused by excess intake of fluoride through drinking water or food products or industrial pollutants over a long period. Upon prolonged consumption of fluoride contaminated water, adults suffer from skeletal fluorosis that deforms bones, and children have dental fluorosis. In India, fluorosis is mainly due to excessive fluoride in water, except in parts of Gujarat and UP where industrial fluorosis is also seen. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. See, fluorosis is a disease caused by the deposition of fluorides in the hard and soft tissues of the human body. It is essentially a public health problem because excess fluoride is injected into the body primarily through drinking water, that is through contamination of the groundwater table, and also through food products and as well as through industrial pollutants. This disease caused by the excessive ingestion of fluoride mainly affects the teeth and the bones, and it can result in disorders such as dental fluorosis, skeletal fluorosis, and as well as non-skeletal fluorosis. Dental fluorosis primarily affects the children, whereas skeletal fluorosis, which primarily affects the adults, can cause significant bone damage, especially in the neck, backbone, shoulder, hip, and knee areas. The non-skeletal form of fluorosis can even result in gastrointestinal issues. And in the case of India, fluorosis has been reported in nearly 230 districts spread across 20 states. The most affected states in India are Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Gujarat. Whereas states such as UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, etc., they are moderately affected. Whereas states such as Odisha, West Bengal, and Kerala, they are mildly affected. In most of these states, fluorosis contamination is through the groundwater, whereas in UP and Gujarat, it is largely through industrial contamination. As per the Bureau of Indian Standards, the desirable limit of fluoride in the body is 1 ppm or 1 parts per million. If the disease aggravates, then the condition might become permanent and irreversible. And this large-scale health impact on the community will also have a socio-economic impact in the region. To counter the menace of fluorosis, the government of India had launched a couple of initiatives that includes the Rajiv Gandhi National Drinking Water Mission, which was implemented during the 1980s and 1990s. And then more recently, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare had launched the National Program for Prevention and Control of Fluorosis. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 5, the National Human Rights Commission has directed the district authorities of the New Pada district of Odisha to immediately provide safe drinking water to the people who have been affected by fluorosis. Now let's take up the next question. Indentured laborers from India were taken to Fiji by the British to primarily work in coal mines, sugar plantations, cotton handlooms, or salt mines. The correct answer is option B. They were primarily taken from India to work in the sugar plantations of Fiji. This question has been asked because the 100 years ago article from page number 7 makes a reference to the indentured labor system in Fiji. Now let's take up the next question. Legislators and MPs who have been convicted for serious offences are barred from contesting elections for the current term of the House, for the next term of the House, for 6 years after serving the sentence, or for their lifetime. The correct answer is option C. As per the Representation of People's Act, legislators and MPs, if they have been convicted for serious offences, they are barred from contesting elections during their entire jail term and as well as for another 6 years after serving their sentence. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 9, the central government has argued in the Supreme Court that it would be unfair to bar legislators and MPs from contesting elections for the lifetime if they have been convicted for serious offences. See, the Election Commission of India has pushed a proposal to impose a lifetime ban on those who have been convicted of serious offences from contesting elections in order to champion the cause of decriminalization of politics. Based on this proposal of the Election Commission of India, a public interest litigation has been filed at the Supreme Court, and in response to this petition, the centre has argued against the landmark proposal of the Election Commission of India. Let's look at the next question. The P-8I Poseidon aircraft operated by the Indian Navy is used for long-range reconnaissance, maritime surveillance, anti-submarine warfare, or all the above. The correct answer is option D, all the above. See, the P-8I Poseidon aircraft has been procured by the Indian Navy from the United States. It is primarily used for maritime surveillance and anti-submarine warfare, but it can also be used for long-range reconnaissance as well. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 10, according to which the Chief of the Indian Navy has admitted that P-8I Poseidons were used during the recent tensions with India and China, and as well as during the Doklam dispute of 2017, in order to monitor Chinese activities across the Indian border by carrying out long-range surveillance activities. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Bhasan Char island, which is in news, is located in Bangladesh. The government of Bangladesh is resettling the Rohingya refugees on the island. It is a low-lying island located in an area that is highly prone to cyclones and coastal floods. All the three statements are correct, so option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 13, Bangladesh has already begun the shifting of Rohingya refugees to the Bhasan Char island. Now let's take up a question from the 2018 prelims paper. With reference to solar power production in India, consider the following statements. India is the third largest in the world in the manufacturing of silicon wafers that are used in photovoltaic units. The solar power tariffs are determined by the Solar Energy Corporation of India. Both the statements are incorrect. Option D is the right answer. See, India hardly produces any of the silicon wafers that are needed for manufacturing photovoltaic units. They are mostly imported from China and other European countries, and the photovoltaic units are just assembled in India. So the first statement is incorrect. And the solar power tariffs are determined by the CERC, the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, not by the Solar Energy Corporation of India. So both statements are incorrect. Option D is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, tensions between US and Iran concerning Iran's nuclear weapons program is a threat to global peace and stability. In this context, evaluate the way forward for the two countries to de-escalate. The second question, the opposition of farmers to the new farm laws is primarily centered around the MSP procurement system. But the government should realize that it needs it even more for the PDS. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.